Colorado, 1881. The sharp sound of iron pliers slicing through barbed wire shattered the silence of Bitter Rock Valley. Jack Rowan stood motionless on the rocky outcrop, his fingers gripping the trigger of his Winchester rifle. Below, massive ore wagons loomed, carrying a forged warrant declaring the seizure of his borderland. Before sunset tomorrow, either you open the gate yourself or the law will open it for you. Losing this ravine, Jack would lose his last refuge from a bloody past. But if he fired, the former sheriff would drag himself back into the mire of violence he had sworn to leave. However, fate did not wait for sunset. Midnight. The first snowstorm of the season descended. A dark figure collapsed just before the section of fence that had been cut. A woman. Her clothes were tattered, her breath shallow, but her frozen, bloodied hands still clutched a pistol and a crumpled piece of paper. The man who had spent his life running from trouble now pointed his gun at someone radiating danger. Someone who had just knocked on the door of death. "Who are you?" The woman looked up. Her eyes were desperate but sharp as a knife. The one kneeling on the ground, trembling, waiting for her life to be saved, was concealing a weapon that could destroy the one standing. "I am Mary Vail, and I am your only chance to avoid losing this land." Before the threat of tomorrow had even faded, salvation and execution arrived together in a snowstorm. The countdown to the truth began. Dawn at Bitter Rock Hollow rarely brought warmth. Wind from the mountaintop swept down, carrying the bone-chilling cold of early winter frost. That morning, the sleepy scent of pine resin was torn apart by the acrid smell of iron and steel and the heavy rumbling of wagons. Jack Rowan stopped his horse at the top of the slope. 12 miles of fence he had personally built now gaped open at the throat of the valley. 3 enormous ore wagons, loaded with iron stakes and crowbars, silently advanced toward his land. The man who disembarked from the first wagon did not have the rough appearance of a miner. Pierce Dalton wore a neatly tailored wool coat, a half-smile concealing the ruthlessness of a cunning merchant. Jack didn't bother to speak, the clicking of the Winchester Model 1873 being loaded on the saddle was the only answer. Pierce stopped. He didn't draw his gun, but calmly took a roll of parchment bearing the red seal of the town's land office from his breast pocket. "Calm down, Rowan. This rock crevice has just been re-registered as a public freight route." Pierce's voice was soft but condescending. "You're hindering the development of the entire town." Jack's eyes swept across the clear stream behind him, then down to the heavy truck tracks threatening to crush the last remaining pasture for the cattle, making way for ore and lead dust. If Pierce can open a path through here, Rowan Hollow Ranch will be dead. Jack's only refuge will be taken away. Jack's finger tightened on the trigger. A single shot to the forehead of this agent could settle everything, just as he had done in those death-filled towns years ago. But the ghost of an innocent teenager falling in a pool of blood in the past suddenly appeared, gripping his hand. Jack lowered the gun. Pierce Dalton smiled triumphantly, turned on his heel, and got into his car. "Before sunset tomorrow, Rowan, either you open the gate yourself or the law will open it for you." That night, the snowstorm swept across the foothills earlier than expected. The wind howled through the wooden walls like a mocking laugh at the former sheriff's helplessness. Jack sat in the shadows, cleaning his pistol by the flickering firelight. He had sworn never to use a gun to take another life, but tomorrow, that vow could be a death sentence for this land. Suddenly, a mournful horse neigh mingled with the howling of the storm. Jack jumped, grabbed his storm lamp and rifle, and rushed outside. Right at the boundary where the fence had been cut that morning, a figure lay slumped in the snow. Not one of Pierce Dalton's henchmen. It was a woman. Jack turned her over. Her lips were pale and bleeding, her dress stained with mud and frost. But even in the face of death, her reflexes were frighteningly sharp. Her frozen hand instinctively clutched the pocket of her cloak where a small pistol was hidden. Jack took the gun, lifted her up, and carried her into the sheltered stable. As he removed his soaking wet coat to keep her warm, a metal object rolled onto the straw floor. It was a spent cartridge. Engraved on the tarnished brass was a cross, the unmistakable deadly mark of the Gideon Rusk gang. Jack recoiled. The Rusk gang were the most vicious beasts in this territory. Anyone associated with them carried blood and destruction. The woman stirred, her eyes meeting the barrel of Jack's gun pointed directly at her. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she just gasped softly. "What's your name?" Jack growled. Mary Vail," she replied, her eyes desperate but sharp as a knife. Jack narrowed his eyes, looking at her face, drenched in cold sweat under the storm lamplight. The name was unfamiliar, but those sharp cheekbones were familiar enough to send shivers down his spine. It was exactly like the portrait of a half-faced female criminal on the yellowed wanted poster plastered at the train station 5 years ago. The woman kneeling on the ground begging him for a drink of water unknowingly carried a problem even worse than the ore wagons outside. Inside the dimly lit cabin, Jack smoothed out the creases of the old wanted poster. The portrait depicted a half-faced woman bearing a different name, but those cold, sharp eyes were unmistakable. Accomplice in the train robbery, hanging or life imprisonment. He rolled up the paper and tossed it deep into the bottom of the wooden chest. He should have tied her up at dawn, slung her onto a horse, and handed her over to Sheriff Owen Bell to get rid of all the trouble. But when the first cold rays of sunlight streamed through the window, touching the broken barbed wire outside the rock crevice, Jack made a different decision. He threw Mary a bundle of iron pliers and a pair of worn leather gloves. "You can hide in the stable for one night. In return, mend that section of the fence. When you're done, leave." Mary didn't say thank you. She took the tools with blood-stained hands, silently nodding. Between two people full of secrets, silence is the safest language. But silence is also the boundary they use to scrutinize each other. Through the gap in the stable door, Mary secretly watched Jack. She saw how he smoothly disassembled and reassembled his Winchester, a machine accustomed to the smell of gunpowder. The way he always leaned to conceal his position, and the charred scar on the edge of his collar, indelible marks of a man who had once worn the badge of law enforcement. And Jack was also assessing her. This woman was unlike the delicate beauties of the towns on the east side. She knew how to tie a strong knot in rope. She knew how to use wood ash and snow to stop the bleeding from a horse's hoof wound. Survival was ingrained in her blood, resilience and toughness. By late afternoon, the fence had been repaired. Jack came out and threw her a water canteen. Mary caught it, but her eyes didn't meet his. Instead, they were fixed on the deep ruts left by Pierce Dalton's ore-carrying wheels in the mud and snow. She knelt down, her pale fingers tracing the rusted cut on the wooden post. "Your men cut in the wrong place, Jack," Mary whispered, her voice fading into the evening mist. "They didn't cut it completely to clear the way. These jagged pincer marks were left there intentionally." She looked up, her sharp gaze fixed on the former sheriff's darkening face. The man who cut the fence last night didn't intend for those vehicles to pass. He was just setting a trap. He wants to provoke you. He wants your gun to fire first, so the law has a pretext to legally seize this land. Mary's warning was like a spark thrown into dry grass. Before dawn, Jack saddled his horse and galloped straight through the thin layer of snow to Silver Bend. This mining town used to be a place where the law was enforced with respect, but now it reeked of lead dust and greed. At the land office, the secretary was sweating profusely, his eyes avoiding the cold gun tucked into the former sheriff's belt. The Rowan Hollow Ranch boundary records are being reviewed by the council, he stammered, his hand covering suspiciously torn pages of the ledger. There are some overlaps in priority for road construction. Before he could press the lyre, a rhythmic tapping of a cane echoed from the front door. Pierce Dalton walked in. His coat brushed off the dust of the road, and he smiled politely like a savior. You see, Rowan, your ore route through the canyon will bring life to Silver Bend.
Dalton gestured out the window, where the forge blazed and trucks bustled about.
The hotel is full. The forge is busy. The sheriff has extra budget. If you oppose me, you're blocking the livelihoods of all those people out there. Jack gritted his teeth. He realized Dalton's true, terrifying nature. He wasn't using guns to seize land. He was using prosperity to turn Jack into an enemy of the entire community, bending the law with complete impunity. Stepping out of the office with his anger simmering, Jack ran into Sheriff Owen Bell. The old sheriff looked at Jack with a complex expression, his thumb tracing the tin badge. "Be careful, Jack," Bell said softly, just loud enough for the two of them to hear. "Intelligence reports that a wanted female criminal has landed in this area. Anyone who harbors her will lose everything, including their freedom." Jack nodded slightly, pulling his hat down to hide the change in his expression. The noose was tightening around him from both sides, the land he was protecting and the woman he was sheltering. He understood that there was no room for reason here. But just as Jack turned and grabbed onto the saddle, a small hand suddenly pulled at his coat from the dark alley. A young messenger boy hastily thrust a crumpled piece of paper into Jack's hand, then vanished into the cold mist. Jack unfolded the fold. A hastily written line in charcoal caught his eye, sharp as a knife. "Don't trust the new map. Bitter Rock Cut was never a good route." When Jack returned to Rowan Hollow, the cold wind still howled through the cracks in the wooden walls. He was convinced the woman on the warrant had escaped with a horse and a few scraps of food. But what caught his eye was a section of barbed wire fence, expertly stretched and tightly secured. And from the gray crevice, the panting of a young calf mingled with weary soothing. Mary was there. Half her body was submerged in the soft snow, her bare, blood-stained hands straining to pull the calf trapped between two sharp rocks. She didn't cry, she didn't complain, only a stubborn, clenched-up expression on her cracked lips. That evening, by the crackling fire, Jack pushed the plate of food and the bottle of antiseptic toward her. Silence enveloped the small hut, thick and suffocating. Love and trust on the frontier didn't begin with sweet words, but with blood spilled on the fence and shared warmth in the storm. "Pierce Dalton doesn't get his hands dirty," Mary suddenly said, her voice hoarse but clear. "He hires the most despicable to get his hands dirty." She looked up, her eyes reflecting the fiery red. "I used to be with Gideon Rusk's gang, and I know he's coming here, Jack. He's the hound Dalton unleashed to force you to fire." Jack froze. His eyes darkened. He knew the name. Rusk's gang was a pack of beasts. The sheriff has got his nose in you. Jack turned, throwing another log into the fire. "Take the food, a horse, and leave here before dawn. The affairs of this valley are none of your business." That's how Jack protected her, and also how he desperately tried to prevent his own violent past from awakening. But Mary didn't take the chance to escape. She'd been running her whole life, and the price she paid was endless torment. She slowly slipped her hand under her tattered undergarment, pulling out a yellowed piece of paper stained with dried blood. Mary placed it on the rough wooden table, smoothing out each crease. "You sent me away because you thought Pierce Dalton only wanted the road," Mary whispered, her gaze fixed on Jack's disbelief. "But Bitter Rock Cut isn't what he wants, Jack. What he craves lies deep beneath it." The wind howled through the canyon like the wailing of forgotten souls. Under the pale moonlight, Mary led Jack along a path overgrown with thorny vines, venturing deeper into the most secluded part of Bitter Rock Gorge. Jack bent down, shining his storm lamp on the rock face. Sharp fragments lay scattered on the snow. Not from a landslide. These are test drill marks, fresh, neat, reeking of black gunpowder. "Silver veins," Jack muttered, his voice breaking in the frigid air. Mary nodded. "Pierce Dalton has been secretly surveying the geology of this place. He bribed the land office to falsify records, turning your land into a public road. Once he legally gains access, the entire underground silver vein will belong to him." She took a deep breath, bravely exposing the wounds of the past she had wanted to bury. Gideon Rusk once robbed a horse-drawn carriage carrying land registry documents. Among them was the original survey map proving that Bitter Rock Cut was entirely within your farm boundaries. I hid half of the map. The other half is in Gideon's possession. Jack looked at the small woman before him. The truth was revealed. If he wanted to keep this house, he couldn't fight with guns. He had to reclaim that map. But if Mary testified to legitimize the evidence, she would have to step out of the shadows, stepping straight into the noose of the law. They looked at each other, outwardly cold, but inwardly a storm of conflict raging. Jack realized she was his only hope. Mary realized that to save this man, she had to surrender herself to death. Suddenly, Jack's heel struck something hard beneath the thin layer of snow. He bent down, brushing away the icy frost. A measuring stake, used by the miners, had been driven deep into the ground. Before dawn, their time was running out. They had already marked out the plots. Pierce Dalton wasn't going to wait until spring. He would seize this place outright within the next few days. The pale light of dawn hadn't yet dispelled the chill when the pounding of horses' hooves crushed the thin layer of ice outside the fence. Sheriff Owen Bell appeared, followed by two burly deputies and the unwelcoming presence of Pierce Dalton. Jack silently stepped out, his large frame blocking the cabin door, his thumb resting lightly on the hammer of his pistol. But Owen Bell's gaze didn't meet his. The old officer slowly pulled a wanted poster from his pocket, unfolding it to the wind. "Bring that woman out here, Jack. You're harboring a criminal," Pierce Dalton smirked, his words chillingly cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "Concealing an accomplice in murder. That's enough to strip you of all your land ownership immediately, Rowan." The air froze. With just a nod, Jack could hand Mary over, get rid of all trouble, and keep the land. A familiar, cruel exchange in the Wild West. Jack slowly raised the barrel of his gun. His self-control was reaching its limit. But before he could step forward, the wooden door behind him creaked open. Mary stepped out on her own. She didn't cry. She didn't hide behind the man trying to protect her. She looked directly at Sheriff Bell. "That warrant says I concealed a crime. But the man standing next to you, Pierce Dalton, is the one concealing a large-scale land grab." Dalton's smile froze. Mary continued, her sharp voice cutting through the wind. "The survey map at the town office is fake. I have evidence and half of the original map proving that Bitter Rock Cut belongs entirely to Jack Rowan." Sheriff Bell paused. The pressure of frontier law forced him to weigh a vague arrest warrant against a shocking fraud charge. He looked at Mary, then at Jack. "I'll give you exactly 48 hours. Bell snarled, putting away the arrest warrant. "Bring the remaining evidence to my office. Otherwise, I'll hang you and fire him." As the group rode away, Pierce Dalton deliberately spurred his horse past Mary. He bent down, his voice hissing through clenched teeth like a venomous snake slithering on rocks. "You have 48 hours to remember who you are, but Gideon Rusk only needs an hour to remind you." The name Gideon Rusk, uttered, cast a frosty veil over all hope. He was no longer a ghost of the past. He had smelled blood and was very close. The sky darkened. The mountain wind began to howl wildly. The snow fell heavily, intent on erasing all traces of life. Jack reined in his horse, stuffing more cold copper bullets into his satchel. "Stay here and lock the door," Jack said decisively, without blinking. "I'll go to the old carriage station, get the map, and be back before dawn." But Mary stepped forward, resolutely snatching the reins from his hand. "You'll die before you find it, Jack. Gideon doesn't hide things under the wooden floorboards like petty thieves." 3 knife marks on the pillar, horseshoe-shaped stones, and a leather pouch buried deep in the rubble. Only I can read his markings. Jack looked deep into her eyes. For years, he had been tormented by his failure to protect innocent people. And now, instinct urged him to keep her in blind security. But Mary wasn't a lamb to be sheltered. She was a companion he needed to stand by. He nodded silently. 2 figures silently blended into the white snow. They weaved through the sparse pine trees, avoiding the trails to evade the watchful eyes of the henchmen. All along the way, the biting cold threatened to strip away all their strength. But in the midst of this harshness, they relied on each other. The line between a former sheriff and a female fugitive was blurred by an unspoken belief. As darkness fell completely, the black ruins of the old carriage station appeared like a desolate grave in the heart of a snowstorm. Mary went ahead, her scratched hands searching for the marks left by prying up the rotting pillars. She knelt, using her dagger to scrape away the icy earth and stones, pulling out a tattered leather bag. Hope screamed in her chest. Jack stepped forward, shielding her from the wind, shining his dim oil lamp inside the bag. But there was no map. Inside were only dried bloodstains. And a spade playing card bearing Gideon Rusk's deadly cross. They were one step ahead. The spade playing card fell to the cold snow. Before they could recover, the clanging of 3 rifles echoed from the darkest corners of the carriage station. Gideon Rusk emerged. The man, his face scarred by fire, radiated a chilling aura, colder than the blizzard outside. "Well done, Jack Rowan," Gideon sneered, kicking away the pile of wood chips with his shoe. "But you've come to the wrong place, and with the wrong people." Gideon's venomous gaze slithered toward the stunned woman. "Long time no see. Should I call you Mary, or by your old name from when we fled Sonora?" Mary didn't flinch, but her shoulders trembled. "Tell your esteemed former sheriff." Gideon's voice was harsh, piercing a wound that had never healed. "Tell him how you stood there when I shot that innocent witness in the chest. Your hands weren't stained with blood, but you survived with your cowardly silence." The cruel truth was revealed. Mary closed her eyes, waiting for Jack to release her hand, waiting for the familiar contempt from a man who represented justice. But Jack didn't move. His strong shoulders remained between her and the enemy's gun. He had chosen to believe in the woman who had sacrificed herself to save the cattle in the storm, rather than judge a ghost from the past. Gideon's arrogance was his Achilles heel. Taking advantage of his momentary slander, Mary sprang up. She snatched the storm lamp from Jack's hand and threw it into the pile of dry straw where the bandits' horses were tied. The flames erupted fiercely. The horses, panicked, neighed loudly and kicked through the barricades. In the chaotic, smoky chaos, Mary pulled Jack's hand and leaped out the window. Before escaping, she swiftly snatched a piece of paper blown by the wind from Gideon's coat. A faded receipt bearing the signature of the land clerk who had accepted the bribe. They frantically spurred their horses into the night, leaving the blinding, deafening sounds of gunfire behind them. But the price of survival was always incredibly high. When the pale dawn broke, they returned to Rowan Hollow, only to witness a horrific scene. The north gate had been cut to shreds. The cattle had scattered in panic into the snow-covered woods. Jack's only livelihood had been mercilessly trampled by Pierce Dalton. All day long, the north wind howled, tearing the valley apart. Jack and Mary, exhausted, tried to herd the cattle back, but it was too late. The water trough had been smashed, frozen into sharp shards of ice. Half of the hay stockpile for the winter was burned to ashes, reeking of burnt wood. And beneath the thick snow lay the cold, frozen carcass of a young calf. Rowan Hollow Ranch will not survive this winter. Jack's patience finally broke. His calloused hands trembled with rage. He flung open the trunk, pulling out his ammunition belt and 2 pistols that had been hidden away for years. "I'll find Gideon. I'll finish them off." Jack's eyes were bloodshot, the murderous intent of a seasoned gunman surging forth. "No, Jack!" Mary lunged forward, using her whole body to pin down his arm holding the weapon. "If you pull the trigger now, you'll fall into Pierce Dalton's trap. He's waiting for you to shoot someone, to prove to the whole town that you're nothing but a cold-blooded killer. You'll lose everything, including your honor." Jack lowered his head, a gnawing helplessness tearing at his heart. He had guns, but couldn't use them. He had strength, but couldn't protect his own land. That night, the wooden walls were shrouded in an oppressive silence, as Jack, exhausted, drifted off to sleep by the dying embers of the fire. Mary quietly rose. She looked at the man who had faced death for her, who had sacrificed his own safety for her. The greatest sacrifice wasn't dying together, but accepting to leave so the other could live. Mary hid the bribe receipt, the only evidence, in her dress. She would go to Silver Bend alone, surrender herself to the sheriff, and use her testimony to expose Dalton's plot, preserving a boundary for Jack. She walked out the door, disappearing into the stormy night without a word of farewell. The next morning, Jack woke up. The shack was empty. Only cold ashes remained in the fireplace. He rushed out like a madman, and then his chest felt as if it were being squeezed. On the rusty barbed wire stretched across the Bitter Rock ravine, a piece of handkerchief torn from Mary's dress fluttered in the wind. On the yellowed fabric, a fresh, red bloodstain hadn't yet clotted. And beneath the accumulated snow, the hoof prints of horses were brutally dragged, heading straight towards Gideon Rusk's lair. The wind howled through the Bitter Rock ravine like the lament of a dying age. At the throat of the valley, a violent trial was being set up. Gideon Rusk tightened his rough arms around Mary's neck, the dark muzzle of his gun pressed against her temple. Behind him was Pierce Dalton, the land clerk, and the townspeople of Silver Bend who had been herded in to witness a bloody spectacle. "Look carefully, Sheriff." Pierce Dalton smirked, his gaze fixed on Owen Bell, who was gripping the reins tightly. Jack Rowan attacked the transport officer. He's nothing more than a murderer. Pierce wanted to provoke Jack into firing. He needed Jack to shoot first, to make this land grab appear as legitimate self-defense in front of the entire community. The sound of hooves pounded the cold, hard ground. Jack Rowan appeared at the edge of the ravine. He carried a Winchester, but the barrel was pointed downwards at the snow. His calmness exuded a terrifying pressure, suffocating the noisy atmosphere. "Pull the trigger, Rowan," Gideon roared, pushing Mary forward as a shield. "Let's see whose bullet is faster, yours or my finger." Jack looked directly into Mary's eyes, unwavering eyes devoid of any pleading. He slowly lowered his rifle. "If the law here only exists when those with money need it," Jack's voice was hoarse but echoed across the cliffs, "then today the law must listen to the truth." Taking advantage of Gideon's stunned moment, Mary struggled, shaking off the arm gripping her neck. Despite the wound on her shoulder soaking her undershirt with blood, she stepped forward. She pulled a crumpled receipt from her bosom. "The land clerk took money from Pierce Dalton to falsify documents. I silently watched Gideon kill an innocent witness. That cowardice has haunted me for 6 years. But today, I will not remain silent." At that very moment, the errand boy who had delivered the news to Jack suddenly slipped through the crowd. The timid boy handed Sheriff Bell a tattered, leather-bound notebook. The original land registry book Jack had asked him to find days earlier. 2 pieces of evidence that fit perfectly. Bitter Rock Cut belongs to Rowan Hollow Ranch. The public transport route was just a ruse to steal the underground silver vein. The truth is revealed, money can't hide it. In a fit of utter panic, Gideon Rusk roared like a cornered beast, pointing his gun directly at Mary. Bang! The explosion ripped through the eardrums, but Mary didn't fall. From 30 yards away, Jack's pistol smoked. The bullet didn't hit Gideon in the chest, as he had judged villains in the past. It shattered the hand holding the gun. Gideon collapsed, letting out a pathetic scream. Jack had won. It wasn't because he shot faster, but because he no longer let violence define who he was. Mary stepped forward, untied the reins from the nearest horse, and personally bound the beast that had haunted her life to Pierce Dalton's forged surveying stake. Sheriff Owen Bell sighed, signaling his subordinates to handcuff Pierce Dalton and his secretary. When things calmed down, he turned to look at Mary. "The truth has saved this land," Bell said, his voice choked. "But you still have to answer to the law for that arrest warrant." Jack looked at her, his hand unconsciously dropping. For the first time, he didn't step forward to shield her. He respected her choice. Mary held her head high, smiling peacefully in the biting wind. "I know. This time, I won't run away again." A few weeks later, the harsh Colorado winter began to give way to the first warm rays of sunshine filtering through the sparse pine trees. Pierce Dalton's empire crumbled behind bars. The ore transport route through Bitter Rock Gorge remained open, but now it operated under Jack Rowan's ironclad conditions. Every wagon had to pay a legal fee, not damage the springs, and absolutely no encroachment on small farms. At Silver Bend, Mary Vail's death sentence was overturned. Her courageous testimony couldn't completely erase her past, but it brought her clemency. She was sentenced to community service, working as a record keeper at the town's newly built school, a way to atone for her past betrayal of an innocent witness, and also to redeem her own soul. That morning, the fog quickly dissipated, giving way to a clear sky. At Bitter Rock Gorge, the sound of metal clashing echoed again, but it wasn't the sound of cutting barbed wire. Jack used the back of his hammer to pry away the rusted nails, removing the faded wooden sign that had hung there for years. The sign, bearing the solitary words, "Private Land, Return," fell to the mossy ground. He stepped back, making way for Mary. Her hands were no longer marked with the bleeding cuts of the snowstorm. With a relieved smile, she placed a brand new sign on the wooden frame, hammering it down firmly. The new inscription, deeply etched, proudly caught the sunlight. Rowan Hollow Ranch, gates open at dawn. Jack didn't utter sweet words of love, nor did Mary need a grand wedding. Their love was forged in blood, cold snow, and unwavering trust. They leaned against each other, gazing out at the vast highway, understanding that home wasn't a place to escape the world. The roof is where they found the courage to face the truth and give each other a chance to live differently. Before, Jack Rowan built a fence to keep the world out of his way. But at Bitter Rock Hollow, the woman who was once on the run from the law helped him open the first gate. Sometimes the hardest barrier to cross isn't barbed wire fences, but our own past. Thank you for staying with Bitter Rock Hollow until the very end. If Jack and Mary's story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to the channel. Your support is the gateway for us to continue our journey together through the thorny stories of survival and love in the Wild West ahead. Goodbye, and see you again.